So before we get into this actual conversation, do you think that it would be okay if, with organized play announcement that we have coming up in quarter 1, we don't know that it's January or February, whatever it is, it's coming up in quarter 1.
It'll be in January.
It'll probably be in January. I'm hoping it's like January 4th, if we're being honest. But do you think it would be an okay spot to have a ban list?
Yes. Because I think that establishing that cadence now, when inevitably it's going to happen regardless whether we think it should happen or not, it's inevitable that's going to happen at some point in the game's life cycle. I mean, the biggest card games in the world have them, and they don't seem to have an issue. And they've had them since I've been playing them, which is a long time. So it's not that big of a deal. And so, I mean, I played with restricted lists too, which I don't think are realistic here. But so to me, like, just to get players in the cadence of being used to there even being one, I think they should just, if they agree with us that there is a problem in the data that we're seeing and they agree with it, I don't think there's any issue with starting it at the same time as announcing the organized play, because to me, it shows they're actually looking at the data and taking it seriously and understanding that they might have an issue and something might have been missed during the process, which I think we'll get into in a second. As long as they're, in my conversations with them, and I know in your conversations with them, the design team of Lorcana seems to be pretty open to feedback, discussion, understanding what might happen. So, you know, I think it would be good for to get players in the cadence of understanding that this is a possibility that may happen. So they might as well just start with it and rip the Band-Aid off right away. So players understand that it's something, it's a tool that they can use to balance what's going on in a competitive game. And again, every game does it, and every game that has competitive play does it. So like anyone that's coming from another game, it should just be, very obvious that they exist. So
before we go further with that, common conversation happens. I see it all the time, and I'm pretty confident of your answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure.
Ban versus restricted.
I mean, I don't. Restricted lists are like for Power 9 cards. Like they're not. I don't like number restrictions on cards. Just get rid of the card in general. Like I remember back in there were cards back in the day that were restricted and still formed like when you drew them or when you found them, they still formed the entire basis for like how good the deck was. So like restricted lists don't do anything in my opinion. Like I understand like mathematically they do something to your ability to draw the card, but like it can still have you just wind up having an undue influence on the game when you draw the card and your opponent doesn't. And I don't think it's good for the game either. I don't play any active games that still use restricted lists. I think like Yu-Gi-Oh! Pokemon might still use them, but I don't think there's it. Then it just becomes like who draws it, and guess which color has the most card draw, and the problems that we're talking about that's going to get you to draw those cards that are now restricted, and you both have less of them in your deck. Like it's not going to do anything.
I think it's even more than that. I think the mulligan rule alone, is enough of a reason to say that like it's not good enough. In all honesty, like I was never a fan of restricted lists for many reasons, and I know that like the big argument for them is, well, I can still play my cards. I get it, right? Like I get everybody wants to play their cards. I totally understand that, but at the same time, it's like, would you really want to play your cards, or do you want to play a healthy format? Because I want to play a healthy format. In all honesty, like I don't care what the cards are. I just want it to be healthy, and I want it to be a fun environment. I want there to be more than one deck that absolutely crushes and dominates like a metagame, to where it's like if I'm real busy at work the next 3 weeks and I can't play anything, and I decide I want to go to Cincinnati, I don't even need to think about what I'm playing in Cincinnati. Like for 3 weeks, if the next 2 weeks of holiday doesn't even matter, I would show up in Cincinnati and I would just play Ruby Amethyst because it's an easy decision. That's a terrible spot to be in a card game. Terrible spot. So restriction, see you later. Don't want anything to do with it. Ban list. If you're going to do it, just ban cards, get rid of them, and let's discuss why. So you made this really, really pretty amount of information here, Scott. So I'm gonna chuck it to you with the cute little mini Mickey Mouse just doing the shrug. Like, why? Why are we talking about this? So go ahead, Scott.
So as we talked about, I believe it's with organized play announcement, it's prudent to get people used to there being a ban list. We already talked about how Lorcana is not a digital game. So functional errata of cards, like we can't just change the stats on cards. That's not possible to do. Ban lists allow you to, within a set's life cycle, not simply wait for another set to come out. I know there's a theory out there that like, the first 3 sets were created together and we just need to wait for the first 3 sets to come out and then we can make a decision. Yeah, but like that doesn't actually do anything within the moment. Like, I'm not saying that like we can't roll any changes back. Once a card's like banned, things come on and off a ban list all the time. So like if a card in set 3 makes any of these decisions in set 2 like fine and unnecessary, fine, then we can just roll them back. But you have to be aware of like what's going on currently in the format and what and like making it fresh, interesting, and wanting to be able to change things within the metagame without having to wait for a whole other set to come out there. I think point 3 is very important. And I think this is something that like I really want to hammer home. Like, players and designers need to stop thinking of ban lists as fixing mistakes. I mean, we're all human beings and like there are things missed during the design process. Like, I'm not positive even like what the playtesting was for Lorcana, or like, whether it was all internal, whether it was only a select group of people. Like, things get missed when a game goes out to a much wider audience. When a game is played, in digital clients, when a game is played just on more tabletops, more problems are found. And it's okay that those problems are found, but this is an easy lever that they can pull to fix an obvious mistake. So I think the big thing is like, it's okay that mistakes are made during this. Ban lists are not like we failed. Like, we need to ban a card because we failed and it's just too powerful. Like, no, like, just mistakes happen. Like, just understand that things are going to slip through the cracks. Like, ban lists happen. Cards get banned all the time in card games. Like, things just happen. Like, you can't catch every mistake. Like, no one's perfect. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of players that are like, believe me, if you're gonna thumbs down this video, you already have. Like, you're not listening to what we're actually saying. You just don't like the actual concept of not being able to play all the cards, and that's not what we're saying. Like, ban lists keep formats healthy. And again, like, if this was Marvel Snap and every week I could change cards, like, then it would be totally fine. But we don't live in that world. So the only lever that we can actually pull is ban list. I can't think of another lever to pull unless you just, like you said, have $10,000 tournaments all the time and force people to innovate, or else they're just going to play the same thing over and over and over again. And that might be fine too. Like, that still might be the right answer at the end of the day. So then what did you do? Like, there's not always an answer to every problem. Mm-hmm. And I think the big thing is like, people are just scared of embracing change. And I think a ban list is just another change that happens. Is a new set with 204 cards every 3 months a change? Obviously. Mm-hmm. But like, that's not happening a month into a 3-month meta.
Yeah.
And when I really think we're at a time where you already showed 2 major events that are happening, one in January and I think one in February, right?
Yeah.
So there's a 2-month big time for unofficial competitive play. And I don't think people want to see the same deck dominating all the time over and over and over again, because they're in separate areas of the country. You're going to have different players going to each of them, even though some players may travel to multiples of the big events coming up over the next 2 months. But in reality, like, you want people to be innovating. You want to give them a reason to innovate, not simply because they don't feel like playing the deck anymore. Like, if there were mistakes made, if cards are too powerful, just ban them for a certain period of time. They'll be back. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. I really want to hammer home the whole ban list thing, because it's tough, right? Like it's not easy to design a game. Like, it's not easy to design a game that is honestly gone out to this many people to already tell you that there's been 16,000, 17,000 games played for one deck in a short period of time. For events seeing 50, 60, 100, 200 players already within a month, right? Like, it's hard to find these things when you're 5, 6 people sitting in an office room playing on written on pieces of paper that aren't even printed out. Like shit happens, right? Like, straight up, like, it just it happens. So it's one of those where, yeah, I can understand that you can be like angry about it and you can be mad about it, but like the truth is that like you said, we're all human here, right? Like, we all make mistakes, and if it's so easy to like salvage the next 2 months, right? Like, if that's what the point is trying to salvage next 2 months of a potential competitive play, then I think that it's one of those, yeah, you probably should just set a precedent for it. And then, listen, this is Ravensburger's first card game, right? Like, this first trading card game. So realistically, we don't have any idea what they're going to do. I have spoken to players. I know that in former games that like Kaijudo and stuff like that, they weren't like crazy happy about ban list. So they weren't like really pro ban list. So like maybe that comes over to the Disney Lorcana side because of, you know, those scenarios. But every game is different. Every game needs to be treated differently, and every environment that you build cards for should also be treated differently. And I think it's just one of those where when you look at this data right now and you see all of the different points, it's really difficult to not just go, okay, something has to give.
Yeah, totally.
So in that world, Scott, something has to give. We can probably, you know, realistically, you know, I don't know, name several cards that are problematic, right? But the cool thing about building a card game is that you build it in layers. So like the same way that you would build a card game in layers, you need to like remove things in layers. So for me, you know, a lot of the times, you know, for me, like in Magic, I think that like they make the mistake of banning like a piece of the puzzle rather than just the engine of the puzzle. And it's like, oh, well, we solved the problem because we just took a piece away. Now the deck is less consistent. But then before you know it, there's another piece that comes in 3 months, and then it's broken all over again. And then you're in the same process of like, well, do I just ban the engine or do I ban the piece? I'm always going to be of just ban the engine, right? Like, just get rid of it. Like, if that's the problem, if these are the most problematic things, then just admit fault. We messed up. It's fine. Let's move on. Let's get rid of that and let's move on to the next point. Because every single time that you leave the engine in, it just creates opportunity for someone else to break the engine again. Like, that's all we're trying to do, right? Like, as the highest level of competitive players, you're trying to find the most broken thing to do in the game. So anytime you leave a hint of it, players are going to do it. Straight up. So with that, how would you consider like the most important cards? Like what type of like definition would you give them?
They're unanswerable cards that do way more than you should be able to do within the confines of the rules of the game that in one turn.
Okay.
So whether it's like advancing a win condition without actually having to participate in the basics of the game, like questing, whether it's, you know, drawing a million cards a turn without having to actually spend a bunch of resources on it. It's just things that fundamentally just do more than you can realistically do within like one turn of a game. It's just it's speeding you up beyond speeding the game up beyond like one turn's worth of activity.
Right.
That's like my basics.
And now in this game, those type of interactions are compounded because there's no player interaction on opposing turns.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So let's talk about those cards.
Sure.
Go ahead, Scott. Tell me about these two wonderful cards.
So Merlin Goat and A Whole New World simply you just get too much value for their cost or lack thereof in the case of a Whole New World at most times. In my opinion, because we cannot change the numbers on these cards. Like, we cannot change the 7 on a Whole New World. We cannot change the 4/3 inkable nature of the goat with 1 lore. Like, we cannot change those numbers on any of these cards. We can't make them uninkable. We can't change the cost on a Whole New World. We can't change the cost on goat, etc. So because we can't do that, in my opinion, both these cards simply break the rules of the game. Goat, you do not have to quest at all in order to gain lore, and given the combos that are around it, it is the engine. I understand that there are other cards within the Merlin Mim sphere that do similar things, but they don't advance the win condition. They simply allow you to deal with the board more effectively or draw you more cards more effectively, but they don't actively give you, like, put you on the path towards the win condition of gaining lore without actively questing or participating in the game. And I think that's a problem. And other cards that allow you to gain lore outside of questing all have a condition.
Mm-hmm.
Sleepy's Flute, you have to play a song, and it has to be exerted. So it's not like you can do it more than once per turn. Sorcerer's Spellbook costs you a resource to do. It's not a huge...
And it's exerted.
Right, and it's exerted. Goat can be used more than once a turn. You gain the lore on the way in. You gain the lore on the way out. And it goes back to your hand and can be inked. Sleepy's Feud is unlinkable, right?
Yes.
Right. So both those other cards are uninkable also.
Yeah.
So I literally just don't understand the numbers or the effect on this card and how they're at all balanced whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, we can touch on it, but like, its stat line for a 4 cost is also still good.
Yeah.
It's not even like it's bad.
And for a Whole New World, I know it was technically not even on that list, but the dominance of Amber Steel for the past, like, whatever, since the game came out, like, since it was discovered, the card simply just does too much for its cost. And really just is not a fun experience. Like, it takes too many of the fundamentals away from playing a card game. Like, we're dealing with a card game here that is, at the end of the day, like a battle for resources, whether it's cards in hand, whether it's ink in play, whether it's characters in play, etc. And simply exerting a character that you can get into play on turn 2, at the minimum, like, obviously it's not that difficult to do, and then exerting that character to reset both players' hands to 7 when you can take advantage of it better than your opponent can because you're obviously playing the card. Like, it's just not what you should be able to be doing. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And similar cards in other card games have been banned or restricted since literally day 1 of competitive play.
Yeah.
And this card's literally free. It just costs you to exert a character, and that character may get lost, but or may get banished, but like, who cares? Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, so to me, if you remove these 2 cards, you remove powerful engines from the decks that are dominating the metagame.
Yeah. There's several layers to either one of these cards. For me, I think there's no question about it that Goat is questionably the best card in Disney Lorcana today. Like, really. Because of everything he does and everything he can do, and the fact that you just can't even interact with it. And even when you want to interact with it, they still get everything they want it from it. So, like,
yeah,
there's literal no downside to the card. And I can't even say much more about it. The Whole New World, 2 things, right? So the 2, in my opinion, the 2 best mechanics in Disney Lorcana are songs and shifting, right?
Yep.
So, like, they're the 2 most fun mechanics in Disney Lorcana, and a Whole New World gets to benefit from both of them. And you know, this season or this chapter, we got the Queen, who is a 2-cost shift character that happens to cost 5 normally. So now we've learned that in Disney Lorcana, literally on turn 2, you can play a Whole New World. And it was bad enough when you had to wait till like turn 3 to do it or turn 4 to do it on average. But now all of a sudden, like, you can just consistently do this on turn 2 if you wanted to. Oh, it's tough. You know, a whole new world, just everything that it does and represents is a difficult thing, and it's like you said, it's just a crappy interaction. Like, we have this great tool in the game called the mulligan, and the mulligan is one of the more powerful abilities in mechanics in the game, because you can really sculpt out your opening hand. Well, it's like, you mulligan for your opening hand, you got rid of your things and you got what you needed, and all of a sudden your opponent's like literally turn 1 queen, turn 2 shift queen, play a whole new world. Well, now none of it matters.
And you have 7 cards. Like, I can't fathom what world drawing 7 cards, even if it's for both players, is fair. Again, find me where anything that costs, I mean, I understand this costs 0 most of the time, has not been banned or restricted in any card game that allows us to have.
Yeah, and it is one of those where I like to make the argument that, like, this is a different game, right? So there is a different game. There are different rules. There are different scenarios. But the more I say that about a whole new world, well, in none of those other games is the card really ever free. So the fact that you can just cast it for the low cost of, like, exerting my character that might have cost me 2 or 3 to play, and the card costs 5, it's rough. I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I do think that, like, if there is a tier list, right? Like I think you label this as like tier 1 banned cards that are clearly overpowered and honestly irreplaceable. Like, I know that there are steel decks out there that do not play a whole new world, and I would argue that they're all wrong. I would argue that they're just all wrong, because this card, even if it's just a copy of it, whatever. Like, I'm not saying you have to play 4 copies of this in every single steel deck, but the idea that you can ever leverage this to your benefit there's no downside to that. So yeah, Goat, on the other hand, is a 4 of in every Amethyst deck for literally all of eternity. Straight up. Like, there's no way on the planet I'm going to mold out an Amethyst deck from this point forward and Goat is not a 4 of in that deck. Those are problems. So let's talk about tier 2.
So these 2 cards, in my opinion, are simply just better than other options. This is like your power creep. So these cards are simply just the best things you can be doing for their cost. Madam Mim Fox is just like Rafiki on steroids.
Straight up.
I don't know how to say that, like, there were mistakes made in thinking that the returning another chosen character to your hand is a downside. And I believe during the design process, it was thought that that was a downside to these cards. And so that's simply not true. So if we live in a world where that has absolutely no downside, because most of the time you're returning a 1-cost character to your hand that had no use on the board as it is, and wasn't removed by your opponent because it's difficult to remove 1/3s, and then you get to use them for ink on turn 4 or greater anyway. This card has no downside and only upside combos. And it's better than one of the more powerful board control options that there was in set 1 in Rafiki. And like, no character that has 4 willpower or less is safe from being rushed out of the game if it's exerted. Like, so this card alone causes a lack of interaction in the game because you can't get around it. Like, Maui costs 5. So, like, it's a lot different than costing 3. It's 2 more turns, 2 more ink you have to lay down, more cards you have to draw, etc. There aren't combos with returning things to hand for value and getting more, either getting ink later or getting, again, we talked about the Merlin Go combo. There's the Merlin Rabbit combo, etc. Like, so, and there's resetting characters that come into play with enter the battlefield effects, come into play effects, whatever you want to call them.
Removing damage from the table.
Right. Resetting characters, readying them when you replay them. Like, Mim Fox simply causes less interaction in the game that already has not a ton of interaction because of the way that the game plays out. So I don't think it's healthy, but I don't think it's as powerful as the first tier. So like, it's not the first, bullets that I would fire, but I think it would be next.
Mm-hmm.
Be prepared is difficult because I think the game needs the effect. I think the fact that it's a song is pretty irrelevant. The number of times this card is sung is
it's less.
Way less.
It's less relevant now.
Yeah.
In chapter 1, I think it was quite relevant, but now it's definitely less relevant.
Yeah, I just think the card needs to exist in some way, shape, or form. Like, should it have costed 8? Maybe.
Again, if we can errata this, right? Totally different situation, but we can't.
Yeah.
So we can't.
So, but I mean, is 7 too cheap for this effect? Like, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I do believe that this type of effect needs to exist in this type of game because, again, cards like Fox and other like readying cards, like you have to have the ability to not just simply whoever floods the board wins,
right?
And grab your swords, like it just isn't good enough for the same situation. Mm-hmm. So I mean, do I think it has like a target on it? Of course. Like it wouldn't be in like this is still tier 2 for me as to where I would ban cards. So the trickle down effect of banning the first 2 cards may lead to to these cards needing to be banned as well. But I do, like I said, I do believe that this type of effect is needed in the game. Although to be honest with you, at this point, Ruby decks have so much pinpoint removal that it may not even be necessary, and it might be okay. My bigger concern is not Ruby Amethyst when it comes to Be Prepared. It's decks like Popsicle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because right now Be Prepared is it's even better than it was originally printed because now with all of the when this league play things going on. With cards like Spellbook, we're not there yet, but Chapter 3 with locations, like,
right,
utilizing things in play over and over again that Be Prepared does not interact with causes even more problematic play lines, I think. The one thing it has going for it is that it costs 7. So,
and it's uninkable.
And it is uninkable, sure. But there are a lot of games that I think your Popsicle comment is a specific one, but Ruby Amethyst can lose before turn 7, right? Like,
sure.
It honestly, like in some of its worse or tougher matchups, the games are actually over on 6. So that's kind of playing a part of like why this card is necessary, because if we get to a point where aggro can win on turn 5 or turn 4, then like that's a whole other problem, right? Like, like this card doesn't even matter in those matchups. But like a card like Grab Your Sword is like really what becomes the more necessary evil. But that also, the problem with that is that creates a metagame where steal is more necessary and it's there for a reason, and Be Prepared isn't. Be Prepared, in my honest opinion, is like it's being played more now to win a game because you destroy your own goats than it is to like along the game. Like, yeah, those plays happen, but I've also seen so often now where like you're just like Maui that guy, Tremaine that guy, play an Ursula for board presence, make my opponent figure it out, and then somehow all of a sudden during all this, like I found my way up to 17 or 18 lore. I'm just like, okay, I play goat, gain a lore, play Be Prepared, kill my goat, gain another lore, game's over. So it's awkward to think of it like that as like this ridiculously costing card. But in all honesty, if there was a card in the game, if there was an action or a song in the game that read banish one of my characters to banish one of my opponent's characters, that would also be one of the most played cards in the game right now because of cards like Go. So this card is obviously it's a one of one, right? There's nothing else in the game that does it.
Right.
And that's exactly why it's here. I'm not going to sit here and say I'd be sad to see it go. Like if this was what was on the list, then this is what was on the list. But I do think that there's a world that like, if this doesn't exist, then you have way more board states that just go play guy pass, play guy pass, play guy pass, play guy pass, play guy pass. And then there's no downside to that. You're like, if all I have to do is just build up to, 10 or 15 lore, and you can't interact with me because all you ever have is one turn plays to just, I'll slowly remove that guy. I'll slowly remove that guy. If there's no safety valve to just playing, 10 guys in play and never doing anything in the game aside to wait into alpha strike for 15, 20 lore, that's a problem also. And that's where I go when I start talking about cards that I would design. Or start talking about cards by design, is that I believe that in the best nature of this card, it is to remove things like that and to prevent things like that from even happening. Fox, on the other hand, that card's broken as hell. Straight up, guys, seriously, Fox is just unbelievably overpowered. From the first time I read the card, I'm like, what? I don't know. I would ban Fox in addition to the first two cards, without a doubt. I honestly, for me, I let Scott handle the tier. I think Fox is absolutely tier 1, and that card should never have been printed. And it is doing way more damage than anyone probably even actually wants to admit. That card is unbelievably stupid. But let's talk about tier 3.
That's fair. So, these cards are simply just very powerful and are very difficult to. They're the under the radar reasons why the decks do well. Like, they're the engines of the decks to make them work. This tier is way lower than the other two. Like, again, so it's I'm looking at things in stages. But if you look at Rockstar Stitch as a card draw engine, I don't have a massive problem with it. The way it exists right now, but it does form the basis for how most decks operate.
Sure.
Within how most Amber decks simply operate. I mean, like, there's no. It's very difficult to get away from Rockstar Stitch as a card draw engine, and it basically forms the entire base of deck. But the card draw is not free. If you want to look at the card draw that's free, you just look to the right. So
most played card in the game, guys.
Yeah,
most played card in the game.
I mean, Friends on the Other Side is arguably like the best card in the game.
Yeah.
However, I don't think it does anything that's necessarily like broken. I just think it's a lot of the reason why the deck works.
It absolutely creates consistency.
Yeah. The fact that it's inkable, I mean, I see it inked a lot more now than I saw it inked in Chapter 1. I would tell people all the time, if you ever inked Friends in Chapter 1, I don't even understand what game you were playing.
Sure.
I still am not a fan of inking it most of the time, but the way decks are built nowadays, you can get around it because you might not have a 3-cost character, or because you just play Merlin Fox, and it can be just as good, but it's more vulnerable.
Right.
So, I mean, Friends is just the easy target. I don't think it's completely broken or anything like that. I just think it's a card that, like, when you get down to this tier and you say, what are other cards that, like, you can think of that are just way better than other things you can be doing? These two cards to me are just way better than other options.
Yeah. And, I see, trust me, I see you guys in chat, right? Like, I'm watching you guys. I'm following along. These cards, when you get to this part of the tier, in my opinion, they're really never more than a conversation. Because, like,
thing is just a conversation.
It is. Don't worry, it is. But, like, this tier, I think this tier specifically is like, I could list 10 cards for this, right?
Sure,
like,
yeah, that's fair.
Like, there's so many cards that are probably on this exact same level through the game. They're all just parallel. These are the two we chose, right? And I argue that the Rockstar is seeing less and less play, and it's less necessary. So because of those reasons, maybe it shouldn't even be existed. But, like, when you start talking about the most played card in the game as a potential to be banned, it's a real conversation. It's the most played card in the game. It is a free draw 2 cards. I don't know all my Yu-Gi-Oh fans out there, but Pot of Greed is a really damn good card and was banned in Yu-Gi-Oh for a period of time. So, like, that's what these cards are. Rockstar in set 1, in Chapter 1, was way more effective than it is now. But Friends on the Other Side, like, honestly, it was a really weird thing to me when I started looking at the data for the cards, because for some reason I was, like, still shocked that Friends on the Other Side was the most played card, because I don't even think about it when it comes to deck building for Amethyst. It's just there, right? Like, it's just, like, the real question is like, if I could not play Friends on the Other Side, what would I play? nothing replaces it, right? Like, I guess I gotta play Maleficent Sorceress again, but most people are already playing Maleficent Sorceress. So if you're playing that and you're playing Rabbit, well, where do you go from there? Like, the next best options are way worse. You got to talk about Ursula's Cauldron or like Reflection, right? Like none of these cards are the same. They're not even close to the power level. So it's definitely one of those things where you have to put a level of what is a realistic thing. And a card, you know, like I see Ariel coming up a bunch. A card like Ariel, we could talk about that. It's an option. It's a heavily played card in the game, but it also isn't even in every deck. There are versions of Amber that don't play Ariel. There are versions of so there's versions of Amber that don't play Ariel, right? So if there's versions of a card of a deck that don't even play the card, then it's probably less likely that it's that important to hit right now, because it's not like 100% in the metagame. Whereas like all the Amethyst cards we talked about are realistically a 4 of in every Amethyst deck. And if they weren't before, the data is just telling you that like these are the best cards in the game. You should play 4 of them. Like, you should have 4 goats. You should have 4 friends. You should have 4 foxes. Like, it shouldn't even be a thought, because that's how powerful they are. Ariel and Rockstar don't really hit those levels. They hit these levels of they're situationally good in the decks they're meant to be good in. But right now, those decks aren't even like, they're not even the best or consistent decks in the game. So I don't know. I don't know, Scott. Can we talk about the last part? Because we can show off how cute the your coloring books are here.
I found these coloring books. They said addition and subtraction, and I changed it to addition by subtraction.
Ah, there you go.
So again, I think the most important thing is that, like, don't fear change. We need to embrace it. This is ways to make the game more interesting. If anyone has been following, I mean, we follow these results every single week, and we usually repost these results on Facebook or other social media sites. And literally, like, at this point, I'd say like 70% of the comments are just literal. You can hear the groaning.
Yeah.
So like the boredom and the groaning and the things like that just are like, or like, where's Sapphire? Where's Emerald? I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. They're not there. Like, like they just don't exist because of the things you can simply be doing better. Right. So, in my opinion, again, I would only ban the first 2 cards. Like, if you really had to pin me down, and I guess we could argue about Min Fox, we could argue about Be Prepared. That's fine.
Sure.
Like, I would only start with the first two cards, see where that goes. Again, if this was a digital card game, we could do it and then immediately reverse it. But I'm totally fine with like just trying it out, seeing what happens, watching the effects of it, and then moving forward. So to me, I would start with those 2 cards. I've thought about those 2 cards like over and over and over again, and that's just the conclusion that I've come to. I think there's just no doubt about it that if you banned Goat, Whole New World, and then arguably Min Fox, arguably Be Prepared, I think the entire format would change for the positive, and you would just see entire ink colors actually see play.
Right.
And then go from there.
Yeah, it's one of those where if you like literally gun to my head ask me right now, is Sapphire and Emerald going to get better if there are no changes? No, they're not. Like they're not. Like the cards by comparison are less consistent. And that's the reason why we're in this problem, is because at the end of the day, Amethyst creates so much consistency in its current form. And then on top of that, the utilization of these cards are just better than all the other options. There's not a better card than Fox at 3 cost. Doesn't exist. There's no card. You can make a small argument that Ariel somewhat does the same thing in a world where if I hit the song I need, and if I can sing it and she lives and all the rainbow hits, great. But every person in the game right now can't challenge on turn 3 because they know their card's going to just get completely removed by Fox. So literally Fox is stopping cards from challenging and questing on turns 3, 4, and 5 almost for most characters.
Yeah, that's true.
When you're defining that much of a mid game, from a 3-cost card that only has benefits most of the time, problems. Emerald doesn't have an answer. They have no card in the game that competes with it. Like Sapphire is the same way. There's no cards in the inks that have any chance of competing with the consistency of these cards. So there's no way for them to get better. The only way to get better is actually through change. And that's the scariest thing, because I know change is rough. I know it sucks, but the real truth is, like, I don't care how much of a die-hard fan you are of these colors. They cannot succeed consistently in the metagame as it currently stands.
And for the record, I could care less if we do any of these things. I'm still just going to play the best deck. I don't care.
Right. I mean, so that's the fact. In the end, that's the real thing. Like, the discussion is it healthy? Is it okay? Is it a bad thing? Right? Like, it's none of those things. Like, the most important thing, and honestly, for the game's health, is the game to be healthy. It's to have a healthy environment. It's to not have 13 groans on Facebook or Twitter or Discord, wherever, that, oh, look, there was another event with 6 Ruby Amethyst decks. Guess what? It's not going to change. There's not going to be less of them. There's still going to be that many in top 8. It's like, it's just the way it's going to be. I just think that if you really want the game to move forward, and if you want it to be fun, and you want to give people the freedom to actually be creative and successful from creativity, the easy thing to do is make a ban. The harder thing to do is to commit to high-scale tournaments that really force a change, or at least force, the sad thing is, as much as I want to think that, like, it really could force a change, as much as I follow the game, as much as I play the game, as much as the conversations that we have with our team, with other teams, with other established players in the game, like, I don't think any one of us would sit here and tell you that, like, we could find a better thing to do than play Amethyst. Like,
correct.
And that's the real problem, is that at the end of the day, even if you gave me 40 hours a week for the next 3 weeks to figure out the best deck to play in SCG Con Cincinnati, there's a really good chance that it's an Amethyst deck. Like, just a really good chance. I don't know, Scott. I think it's interesting. I think that where we are in the game is a weird point, and it's weird to see this much success for a deck so soon, and they're not really look like a light at the end of the tunnel, aside from just, what is the saying is, like, if you can't beat them, join them, right?
Yeah, totally.
It might just get to that point where 80% of the field is just Amethyst. Like, I mean, it's not it. It's not a position you want to be in. So we'll see. For all we know, guys, there's not gonna be a ban list, right? Who knows? We might have just wasted our time for an hour and 15 minutes.
Totally fine. I always more time than this all the time.
Right. And it is one of those, like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But I do think that it's, like, it really is a healthy discussion. It's really just the core based understanding. Like, if it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, play Ruby Amethyst.
Yep.
Any last words tonight, Scott?
No, just understand that, like, just be open-minded to change is the issue, and new sets coming out is not the change always that's needed. It's with there's change that's needed within a metagame, and it's very difficult for, if you have no incentive to innovate, it's just not going to get innovated. And, like, you just have to look at the fundamentals of some of these cards and what they do, and how we didn't even talk about the NPE. We didn't even talk about NPE.
Sure.
Like, these cards just have negative play experience.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know how you could argue any differently, to be honest with you. So.
Yeah. Negative play experience is the most common reason, I would say, for a card to be banned in any game. Specifically, in the last game we played, the first cards banned were absolutely cards with MPE, and, like, there were definitely cards that were better than it, right? Like, there's almost always cards that are naturally better than cards with negative play experience, but because negative play experience is so effective on a community, that's the reason the cards get banned. And if there's honestly enough of a community that's just like, man, it's really not fun to play against friends on the other side, Madam M Fox, Goat, Rabbit, like there's enough of that, and there's the reason to make an honest change. Like, and again, shit happens. It's okay. If that's what happens, it's okay. But nonetheless, honestly, shout out to chat. You guys were moving the whole time. I didn't get enough of you in here. You really did. A lot of you guys had some really good points. I felt if you didn't see it, if you missed the part where we talked about restricted versus there was a lot of restricted talk. I disagree strongly. I don't think that you want to live in a world where you say, oh, you can only have 2 of a copy of a card. I think if you can only have 2 of a copy of a card, then the next thing that happens is everyone complains that, oh, he drew his 2 of. Like, that's just the next thing that happens. Like, and I think that's a position that nobody really wants to be in and no one really likes. So for me, ban it, get rid of it, see you later, yada, yada. All in all, a lot of fun.
Yeah.
This was a discussion that Scott and I honestly have had 2 or 3 times over the last few weeks because we weren't sure if we were going to do it, but it felt like there was enough reason to do it. Again, shout out to all the people that commented on the YouTube polls. I read every one of them, I promise. We'll have to see what happens. You know, Q1 is not very far away after the holidays. You know, we're probably in full force into the Inkwell and hopefully some fun tournaments that we can actually really talk about that Ravensburger will be at. So we'll have to see. Well, Scott, if I do not see you again live on screen, because it probably won't be here, of course, we have to wish Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy holidays. I hope everyone does have a wonderful holiday. There is maybe a chance we're back before the new year. We'll see. We'll see. If not, thank you guys so much again for hanging out tonight. If you didn't yet, hit the like video. If you're new, hit subscribe. We'll catch you guys in the next video.
See ya.
See you guys.